Hello, and welcome to the discussion of the movie The Insider and the ethical issues that lay within the movie with Kayla Harold and Catherine Scott. Here's a little bit about The Insider. The movie was created in 1999. The movie is actually based on a true story. The director of the movie is Michael Mann. He began his career in the late 70s writing TV shows like Starsky and Hutch in 1975. He directed his first film in 1979. Many of his films are set in Chicago, and many of his cast members are from Chicago or surrounding the neighborhood. The Insider was filmed in Louisville, Kentucky. The producer of the movie is Peter Berg. The movie was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, which was a really popular movie. There was an article created by Marie Brenner about the movie that was The Man Who Knew Too Much. This was actually in the Vanity Fair magazine in May of 1996. This talked about the whistleblower that took place in the Brown and Williamson Company. Now we're going to talk about the main characters in the movie The Insider. First, we have Lau Bergman, which is the journalist for 60 Minutes. He tries to get a hold of Jeffrey Wygant to get the story about his employment at Brown and Williamson. At first, Wygant would not speak to Bergman under any circumstances. Bergman was very persistent in trying to get Wygant to speak with him and show him the beneficials that would come to speaking with him and sharing his story with the public. Next we have Jeffrey Wygant, who was the scientist at Brown and Williamson. He is the main character in the film. When he found out what chemicals the company wanted him to use in making cigarettes, he refused to do so because it would harm people if they were to inhale the chemicals put into the nicotine. When this happened, Brown and Williamson fired him for not doing what they asked. And in firing them, they also made him sign a confidentiality agreement so word doesn't get out about the secrets they're withholding from their customers. If Wygant were to break the agreement, he would have his medical benefits taken away, which were very important to his family. He is the whistleblower of the company. Next, we have Mike Wallace. He is the reporter for 60 Minutes. He is the one that actually works with Lau Bergman, the journalist, and trying to get Wygant's story on the air about the secrets that are withheld from the customers. Wallace is the one that does the interviewing to get the true story that is supposed to be aired in 60 Minutes. Next we have Leanne Wygant, who is the wife of Jeffrey Wygant. In the beginning, she was very supportive on what he wanted to do in regards of speaking or not speaking about what happened when he worked at Brown and Williamson. But things turned for the worse when the family started to get threatened, and he continued to try to tell his story. They ended up in divorce when she wanted him to stop after the threat, and he did not. Then we have Don Wyatt, who is the executive producer of 60 Minutes. He was the one that didn't want to share the story to the public and afraid of being sued. Bergman, the journalist, and Wyatt had it out a bunch of times in the movie about the disagreement of not airing the interview. After they decided not to. Bergman took things into his own hands, which eventually got Wygant really mad at him and had it out even more. And then they decided to have it aired. The producer Wygant actually decided to have it. He had it aired after it all went down. Here's a little bit about the storyline, The Insider. The story is about a former employee, Jeffrey Wygant. He worked for the tobacco company, Brown and Williamson. 60 Minutes employee Lyle Bergman came to Jeffrey Wygant to get his story about the tobacco company he worked for, called Brown and Williamson, after he found out about what had happened. He knew that Wygant had something he wanted to get off his chest and just didn't know how. The company began to threaten Jeffrey Wygant and his family when they found out that he was going to try to go against his confidentiality agreement and tell his story. Jeffrey Wygant took the threats as a challenge and decided to share his story just so the public could know and get back at Brown and Williamson for what they are doing. 60 Minutes ended up trying to refuse the information on the air because in fear of being sued. Lyle Bergman takes things into his own hands because he is one that is strong on his word, and since he told Wygant that he was going to share his story, he was not going to stop until he was able to do that. He ended up sending an article to New York Times to get them to write an article about 60 Minutes and how they are cowards and didn't want to air the truth. After that occurred, the story finally comes out. Brown and Williamson is the tobacco company that Jeffrey Wygant worked for. Jeffrey Wygant was fired from the company after he didn't comply with the company putting chemicals into the nicotine that would cause harmful effects if inhaled, and was then made to sign a confidentiality agreement so the secret never got out. By having him sign this agreement, he would not be able to disclose information because if he did, they would take away his severance pay, potential lawsuit, and loss of medical coverage. B&W sued Jeffrey Wygant in 1995 for violating a confidentiality agreement between them, but agreed to dismiss the lawsuit in 1997. Jeffrey Wygant is considered the whistleblower in the movie The Insider. He is considered that because he went against the confidentiality agreement he was forced to sign. One of Wygant's children was ill and needed the medical coverage that could go away if he was to break the agreement. So he needed to make a choice if he needed to take the risk to risk losing the medical coverage or letting the people know so that the people don't die from taking the chemicals that were put into the nicotine in order to make a better profit. He ended up meeting with Lyle Bergman from 60 Minutes to discuss his story after several times of trying to get a hold of him. At first, he was scared because of the confidentiality agreement. When Bergman contacted him, he had his wife ignore the phone call. Then he went to an extra step and he sent a fax saying, "Please talk to me." And he replied back in fax, "No." And then eventually Wygant learned that it would be best to speak with him, and he finally did. In the end, he ended up losing his marriage from all of the chaos with the threats. He was a teacher at DuPont Manual Magnet High School in Louisville, Kentucky, as a chemistry and Japanese teacher. Lou Bergman is the journalist for 60 Minutes. He is very consistent with trying to get Jeffrey Wigand to tell his story, in which I just told you with the email and the fax and the phone calls. He was not going to stop until he got Wygant to tell his story. He looks into the confidentiality agreement when he finds out that Wygant is holding back the telling the story due to this agreement, and finds out if he would be able to potentially not get sued from breaking this agreement. He is loyal to his word and sticks by Jeffrey Wygant through everything. When he loses his wife, when he goes against his company, he makes sure he sticks by him through it all. He goes against his company, 60 Minutes, when they refuse to air the interview in fear of lawsuits. He does this by going to the New York Times and ratting out 60 Minutes for not airing such a great story. Bergman gave his resignation to 60 Minutes after 14 years of working there, from him not being able to work at that company no longer and be able to say, I can keep my word. The end result, New York Times came out with a story about 60 Minutes withholding the interview from their audience, which made Hewitt change his mind about airing it. Jeffrey Wygant interviews ends up on air. An end result, the bad thing that happened in this is Jeffrey Wygant ends up losing his wife due to all the threats that were coming, and he did not stop in telling his story. And he ended up actually not being able to live with his daughters either. They actually went with their mother. Brown and Williamson was unable to sue Wygant but they did try to. Lou Bergman leaves his job at 60 Minutes because he stays loyal to his word and would find it hard to stay with the company if he could not do so.
Okay, I am going to discuss the ethical issues presented in this movie and talk about the ethical theories and resolutions that we have come up with. Stakeholders. These are the people affected by Jeff Wygand's decision, and they are the Brown and Williamson Tobacco Company, the tobacco industry as a whole, the Wygand family, CBS, and especially 60 Minutes, and then all smokers and all secondhand smokers. Ethical issues. Some of the main ethical issues we see in The Insider are that Brown and Williamson Tobacco Company was altering their product to make the nicotine even more addictive. When Jeff Wygand tried to confront the CEO of the company about this, he was fired and then forced to sign an even stricter, updated confidentiality agreement. Another issue we see is Lou Bergman, the journalist, encouraging Wygand to break his confidentiality agreement, even though this might bring about a loss of his family's health insurance and possibly bring lawsuits against Jeff Wygand. Probably the most disturbing ethical issue was the way that Brown and Williamson Company threatened the Wigand family. Although it was never actually confirmed as to who wrote the anonymous threatening emails, it is very likely that it was a member of the Brown and Williamson Tobacco Company. They also stalked Jeff Wigand, they threatened his family, and then the CEO made it very evident that all of his severance pay and his health care benefit plan would be revoked if Wigand was to break his confidentiality agreement. The main ethical issue that we will discuss is whether or not Wigand ethically had to break his confidentiality agreement. He understood the dangers of what the tobacco industry was doing, and he knew that people would continue to be hurt and die unless someone spoke up. He also understood that he would be breaking his own promise by speaking, and he would be jeopardizing his family's well-being in doing so. The ethical theories utilitarianism. The first theory we are going to evaluate is utilitarianism. This theory states that actions are only right if they are useful or for the benefit of a majority. As you can see, according to this theory, if Wigand chooses to break his confidentiality agreement, the benefit would be that the public would be made aware of the danger that they are in, and the tobacco industry would be held liable for the damages that they have done. The cost or the downside of this decision would be possible lawsuits and possible jail time, and the loss of severance pay and health insurance for the Wigand family. The ending result of this decision would have a high utility rate because the majority of people would benefit from finding out the truth. If Jeff Wigand chose not to disclose what he knew, then the benefit would be that the Wigand family keeps the health insurance and no lawsuits. It would cost more people dying, and the tobacco industry would continue to dominate. The end result would be that the public suffers, but the Wigand family would remain unharmed. Ethical theories, virtue ethics. The next ethical theory is virtue ethics, in which the moral character of the decision maker, not the outcome, determines whether or not a decision is ethical. In this theory, it would be tougher to find a right decision because it just depends on how you think about it. On the one hand, if confidentiality contract, then he has proven himself to have a high moral character because he was helping to put an end to something he knew was wrong. On the other hand, if Jeff Wigand chose to keep his promise, he could be proving that he still had a high moral character because he has proved he kept his promises and he acted in the best interests of his family. As you can see, the benefit of breaking the confidentiality contract would be that the Wigand protects the public from harmful products. It would cost his integrity. The result would be that Wigand protects the promise but compromises his word. If he chooses not to disclose the information, the benefit would be that Wigand keeps his promise and his integrity, but he does not protect the public. The result would be that Weigand's word would be intact, but he has not served in the public's interest. Ethical theories, Kantian. In the Kantian theory, duty is the standard by which ethical behavior is judged. Weigand had said in the movie that he had always considered himself a man of science, meaning that he had a duty to protect and to act in the best interest of the public. However, Weigand also has a duty to keep his promises and to protect and provide for his family. So the benefits of breaking his agreement would be that he upheld his duty as a man of science. It would cost him compromising his duty to protect his family. We believe that the result would be that Weigand would achieve a greater good. The benefits of not disclosing the information would be that Weigand upheld his duty to protect his family. It would cost Weigand going against his belief of public service. The result would be that Weigand would protect and continue to provide for his family, but would not be able to uphold his duty as a man of science. Our ethical theory summary. All of the theories show that there is both a good and a bad side of either decision. For utilitarianism, the benefits of telling the public far outweigh the costs on a whole. However, on a personal level, it would cost the Weigand family almost everything. For virtue ethics, either way, he will go against his virtues. He would either be lying to the public if he stayed quiet, or else he would be lying to his employer if he broke his promise to keep the confidentiality agreement. For the Kantian approach, a greater good is achieved if he breaks his confidentiality agreement, but he must remember that he also has a duty to his family. Our final recommendation. After examining all of the theories presented, we would recommend that Weigand break his confidentiality agreement and disclose the information about the tobacco industry. We could point to any of the theories to validate this recommendation, but I would say that the utilitarianism theory was our biggest influence in making this decision. Because there is so much damage if the tobacco industry was able to keep on selling such harmful products without the buyers understanding the full risk, we determined that the benefits of breaking the contract far outweigh the cost. Therefore, Jeffrey Weigand is ethically liable to break his contract. For our outside research, we used the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. We used IMDb. We used Roger Burt's reviews. We used Michael Mann's biography. We used Jeffrey Wigand's biography. And we used the article from Vanity Fair about the whole story called "The Man Who Knew Too Much."